Hi, I'm Kelly Thomas. Welcome to Ingenious Baby. Every week I'll interview leading experts to help you help your child reach their full potential so that your child can become all that they were born to be.
Welcome to this baby.
Today we're here with Jim Yang, who created a successful program to teach your children how to read. He taught his own children at 2.5 how to read, and he'll share his tips and tricks on how we can do this for ourselves at home. So Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
So I was so excited to find your program because I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I did try with my 4-year-old to teach him reading, and it didn't, when he was 2, it didn't quite work. And my daughter seems to really be taking to your method. So I would love to have you talk about what technique you actually use to teach children.
We teach using a combination of synthetic phonics and phonemic awareness. What synthetic phonics is, it's a very bottoms-up approach where we teach children starting with the most basic and fundamental stuff such as letters, letter sounds, and then we teach them what to do with those sounds. When you teach a child even just 2 or 3 letter sounds, they can start forming words just using the 2 or 3 letter sounds they've learned just by connecting the sounds. Now, most people probably know what phonics is, but not a lot of people might know what phonemic awareness is. Now, what phonemic awareness is, it's really the foundation on which you can effectively teach phonics, and this is completely missing from what you see today, where phonemic awareness is really about training the ears. So the way we teach a really young child to read is you have to train the ears. It's almost like learning a new language, where if you hear a new language, it's really difficult to pick up the different sounds, but when you hear it over and over and over and over, you start picking up the different sounds in it, even though you may not know what it means. But as far as English goes, when a child starts learning the little sounds in it, they already understand English, but when they get enough practice at hearing the different sounds in English, it becomes really easy to teach them to read, because at that point, you're just filling in the little empty spaces, teaching them the different letters or a combination of letters, and then just connecting those together to read most of the words in English.
So how did you come up with this? I mean, why didn't you not use a method that's already out there?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I actually did try other programs, and I actually ended up spending quite a bit of money. My child was around 2 years old, but it was quite apparent, like almost right away, that I realized, okay, she's actually not learning to read, because what ended up happening is, yes, she could read the words that she was seeing, because when you repeatedly see a word, but when you show the same child a different word that she's never seen before, how does she figure out what this word is? From what I understand now, compared to back then, it was really just a whole language and sight word approach to teaching reading, and that just doesn't work. I found this study done by the National Reading Panel, where they did a meta study of over 1,960 studies, where they repeatedly referenced to teaching phonics and phonemic awareness. And what they found was that when you teach phonics and phonemic awareness together, it produces better reading results than whole language programs. And at the same time, when you combine these two, it also improves the child's reading comprehension, and also spelling abilities. So that's what really set me on the path of teaching phonics and phonemic awareness.
So tell us again exactly, what is phonemic awareness?
So phonemic awareness is really just learning to work with the smallest sounds in English. So for example, if we think of a word, like let's say think, there, even though it's made of 5 letters, T-H-I-N-K, but knowing that, okay, this thing has T-H-I-N-K in it is not going to help me read it, because, well, the letter names does not really help me to sound it out. Whereas if I know that, okay, here T-H together makes an unvoiced sound, and then I makes the I sound, and the N makes an N sound, and then K makes a K sound, then we can string those together to say think. So that's why phonemic awareness is so important, because a lot of times, even though you teach a child phonics, you teach them the letters, but they might not know what to do with those sounds, because especially for the younger, usually what I found is between ages 2 to 5, they tend to have a little more problem and difficulties with stringing sounds together. Whereas if I'm working with a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old child that's a struggling reader, they're actually much better at phonemic awareness. So that's why it is so important when you work with a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old, or at any age, I guess, to teach them phonemic awareness so that they know what to do when you teach them these sounds. Because just teaching the letter sounds is not enough.
And that's why sight reading is bad, because you're just memorizing the sight. You're not learning, like you said.
When you try to teach every word as a sight word in English, then it becomes very problematic because, there are over like 170,000 words in English. Like, are you going to have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or even an adult try to memorize all those words? No, you're not. And then, there's these sight words lists. A Deutsch list have 300 sight words, and there's a Fries list of 1,000 sight words. If you try to memorize 300 words, okay, it's not too bad. It's doable. But, how about 1,000 words? Or how about 3,000 words, which is really needed to be able to read 95% of all common text. So, and then when you think about it, English is an alphabet-based language where we have these individual letters or a combination of letters representing sounds. And then when you combine these sounds together, you can figure out what a word is. But then when you try to teach it through sight words method, you're really teaching the child to look at as a picture. So, can you imagine trying to memorize 3,000 words? You're going to have a lot of words that have similar shapes. And then, that's going to cause a lot of reading confusion. And this is where a lot of the reading problems stem from with many of the older kids that I work with. Like, let me give you a few examples. Like, if you think of the words barn, born, burn, if you draw like a shape around those words, they're going to look very similar to a child that does not know phonics or phonemic awareness. Or how about hurt, hunt, and bunt? And another good one is 3, there, these. Like I have like tons of examples like these, and this is why when you just teach sight words without teaching phonics and phonemic awareness is why you have a lot of children with reading problems.
It's because when they were younger, they were taught more sight, and then it turns into problems later.
Yeah. If you look at a word and there are letters in it that represent different sounds, what ends up happening is that they have to resort to looking at the word as a picture. It's almost like learning Chinese. Like, I'm Chinese, but my Chinese is really bad because when I look at all the words, so many of them, they look so similar, and I have a lot of trouble trying to figure out what a word is because they all look so similar. And the same thing is happening with the grade 1, grade 2 kids that I work with that are struggling with reading, where they really have a lot of problems figuring out what a word is because, they all have a lot of similar shapes. So what ends up happening is they end up skipping words, guessing words. And, these are strategies that teachers teach at school too. It's unfortunate because it builds a lot of bad habits in these kids. And when I get these kids, before I teach them and when I'm teaching them, I have to work to undo all these bad habits that they've learned. I live in Vancouver, so in Vancouver, when you have a student that is behind in a certain subject, they get pulled out of their class and they get put in LST, which stands for Learning Support Team. They get pulled out and they're thinking, okay, I'm getting pulled out because I cannot do something the other kids in my class can. Just think of what kind of damage this does to the confidence. And I see it in the kids too because they're really, they're totally bright, smart kids, but they can't read because of how reading is taught at schools. It's not the parents' fault. It's not the child's fault. It's how reading is taught is fault, right? When I get these kids, I go through, usually after the first 2 weeks, I go through our program with them. They start understanding right away, okay, I don't have to memorize words. I can figure out what a word is. When I first get them, I do an assessment with them. I get them to read through this, and they look at the words. What ends up happening is, they're guessing all over the place. They'll just think whatever makes sense to them, and it's completely not what they see. But as they go through the program, sometimes even just after 1 or 2 weeks, they start stopping themselves when they make a mistake, and they look at the word, they don't guess, and they try to sound it out. This is something really awesome to see because if a child does not have the phonics knowledge and the phonemic awareness, they're not going to stop themselves. They just guess, they skip over it. But once they start developing this little bit of knowledge, they stop themselves because they know inside that, okay, what I'm saying does not quite match what I expected to hear. And then so they stop, they look at the word, they sound it out, and then there you go, they got the correct reading. And then, they feel great about themselves. And usually after about, with the grade 1, grade 2s, after about 8 to 10 weeks, they're done my program, they're caught up, and the parents, they're extremely happy.
Right. So how did you know that you're? I mean, 'cause especially kids, 2-year-olds don't even know 1,000 words oftentimes. So how did you know that your kids were ready to read at 2?
It's funny because I had no idea that they were ready. I just wanted to try to see if I can do it. Especially well, with my other three, my young, because I have 4 kids. With my 3 younger ones, I know I was ready because I had the experience with the first one. With my 3 younger ones, it was a little different because what I did something a little different with my second child because of the difficulty that I had with my oldest, for especially during the first 2 weeks when I couldn't figure out whether she was catching on to blending or not. So when my second child was around 1.5 years old, I started doing some phonemic awareness training with him. It was just really basic year training where during everyday speech, I would just pick a random word here and there, and I would just take it. I would segment it sometimes. I would blend it. I would stretch it out. I would say, Ethan, come here. Instead, I would just pick a word. I would say, Ethan, come here. But, at first he would look at you funny because it doesn't make sense to him. And he's like, what are you saying? And then we also do some nightly reading with him every night. And then during simple passages, if I can just find a simple 3-4 letter word, I'll segment that word, I'll blend it, I'll stretch it out, just get him used to it. For the first, because at 1.5 years old, I just wanted to see if I could help the child develop some phonemic awareness before I actually even started any phonics with them. I just kept this up. I wasn't sure if he was going to catch on or not, but after about, I think say like a month or two, he started catching on. And it was really amazing because when I read him at night, let's say I was reading a passage saying, the dog jumped. I would go, the dog jumped. And then at first, when we first started, he would be like, huh? But after a while, I would wait. I would say the dog jumped. He would say jumped. He would know what word I started saying. I was like, hey, he's getting it. It's great.
What's the difference between blending and choppy blending when you're doing it? Can you give us an example? Because I feel like you need to kind of practice as a parent to even be able to teach.
If the parent is lacking some phonics knowledge, where you don't know what sound a letter makes, or if what a combination of letter makes a sound, it's going to be a little difficult. But our program teaches that, and our program also includes 42 audio clips where I demonstrate to parents the proper pronunciation of the sounds, and at the same time how to blend those sounds together. So that's really helpful for parents. I wouldn't say doing choppy blending is incorrect because there is a place for both smooth blending and choppy blending. Now, most of the time I do use smooth blending because it is very important that the child understands that you need to make a smooth connection between each of the letter sounds. Whereas what tends to happen if you just use choppy blending all the time, where you have a distinct stop between each sound. For example, let's say we're doing the word dog. You will go d, a, g, where you have a distinct stop between each sound. That could cause some problems for some children where especially if they're weaker in the phonemic awareness area, they're going to have a hard time trying to connect those sounds together. But if you do smooth blending and do it like dog, where you try your best to connect each of the sounds into the following sound, it'll make it easier for the child to learn and to string the sounds together to say the word.
So when you're teaching, say, a 2-year-old to read, can they really understand what the word means? I saw your kids, like your 3 or 4-year-old was reading a menu at a restaurant, which was amazing, But do they actually really comprehend what they're reading?
So if the words that they're reading is within the vocabulary and it's within their knowledge, then yes, they will understand. But if the words they're reading is way above the level, they've never seen the word, no, of course they're not going to understand what they're reading. So now we're getting a little bit into reading comprehension here. So it's largely a function of 2 things. So number 1 is decoding and word recognition, and number 2 is vocabulary and knowledge. So when we talk about decoding and word recognition ability, is for a child to be able to read and understand what they're reading, their decoding and word recognition ability needs to be really, really fluent. So when they look at a word, they need to know instantly what the word is without spending too much brain power to try to figure out what a word is. Because, if a child is looking at a bunch of text and they're looking at the words, but they're spending so much effort trying to figure out what that word is, they're not going to have that much processing power left over to really think about the meaning of the words and the meaning of the sentences that they're reading, right? But whereas if a child has really fluent reading ability, they have really good word recognition, and if the words that they're reading are within their vocabulary knowledge, then yes, they will be able to understand what they're reading. So, and the thing is, you can actually help a child improve their reading and comprehension just by repeatedly reading the same story over and over and over. And kids don't get bored of it. Like my youngest right now, she got this soup book from her preschool, and then every night she would have me read that book for the past 2 weeks. Like, I'm so sick of it. But she's like, no, I want my soup book.
Why do you think people don't recommend children to read until later then? I mean, what's wrong with teaching someone to read early?
Honestly, I don't see anything wrong with it. Like, this is not something I spend a lot of time in dwelling on, but I know there are some people giving me advice saying that, you shouldn't teach your kid to read until they're 5, 6, and some even later, 7, 8. I can't figure out why, because, the way I look at it is, why do I want to deny my child the opportunity of all the extra learning and information gathering that's made available to them when they learn to read at an early age? When you have a 3, 4-year, 5-year-old that's a fluent reader, just imagine how much more information they can gather from from the environment around them. You're totally empowering your child when you teach them to read early, right? Like, let me give you some examples. A few years ago, in Canada, like Target came to Canada, right? But I guess they weren't doing that well I think it was back in 2014, they were closing down. So I was driving by with my second child, my son. At that time, he was, I think, around 5. And then there was this big red sign that says store closing, liquidation, everything must go. And then my son read that out. He's like, hey, Dad, what does liquidation mean? When you think about that, like, what 3, 4, 5-year-old would know what liquidation? They wouldn't know it. But how do you get vocabulary? How do you build your vocabularies? The way you build it is by seeing it in a text you read. Yes, you develop your initial vocabulary through speech. Just by speaking at home, hearing your family, but all the more advanced vocabulary, it all comes from reading. So when you have this little 5-year-old says that can't read liquidation and the whole thing, and it's really interesting to watch.
So do you think you could teach any 2-year-old to read, or I mean, because some 2-year-olds don't have, like my daughter, for example, started talking extremely early, and she actually asked me to read when she turned 2. She kept, I want to learn to read. She was asking me, but she has a very strong vocabulary, but some 2-year-olds don't. So, I mean,
yeah, I'm pretty confident that I can teach any 2 or 3-year-old to read, or any age, as long as they don't have any learning disabilities. But my personal preference is to work with a 4 to 5 age group, because they're the easiest. They tend to have a little more attention span, and they tend to catch on a little faster. Whereas, if you're working with a 2 or 3-year-old, they're going to be running around. They're not going to sit on your lap nicely for even just 3 minutes. It's really a struggle sometimes. Like with our reading program, I recorded a 12-week period of me working with my son Ethan, just starting from scratch from lesson number 1 and over a 12-week period. And when you watch the videos early on, he's really just doing what you would expect a 2.5-year-old child to do. He's running around, screaming, yelling and stuff. My personal preference is to work with a 4 or 5-year-olds, because they're like a really nice blank piece of paper where they haven't picked up any bad habits or learned any improper pronunciation of sounds from school that I have to fix. So it's really easy teaching them, and they have really good attention span too.
That's great. Do you think that smart children read more, or does reading make you smart?
I think reading makes you smart, because, I think when you have a little child that learns to read early and that reads a lot because they learn to read early, they have, between the ages, I would say, between 3 to 5, 3 to 6, it's a long time, 3 years. Imagine how much more information this child will gather, and how much more vocabulary, how much more world knowledge they will be able to gather just through reading, compared to another child that waits to read until they enter school. If you compare that, it's a huge difference.
I think it's amazing. I just watching your own children, how well they're reading, it's very inspiring. Where can people go for more information about your reading program?
They can learn more about my reading program at childrenlearningreading.com.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing tips. I think it is such an important skill, and I think that more people should be able to help their children learn sooner than later. So.
No, it was great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, thank you. If you know someone who would be a great fit for the show, come on over to ingeniousbaby.com and share your tips and story ideas. You are your baby's first and best teacher.